Good evening and welcome at Ask Wortell, the platform where we share every 2 weeks our knowledge with the community. And this time it's from home, and that's because of Corona, of course. So we're not in our studio in Gouda, but all at home at the evening over here. My name is Laurens Siderius. I'm Azure Business Lead at Wortell, and I hope to give you a very pleasant evening in what we're going to show you about infrastructure as code. My name is Laurens, and I want to introduce my colleagues to you. The first one I want to introduce is Jorrit.
Hi, Laurens. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Cool. Short introduction. My name is Jorrit Meijer. I work as an Azure architect in the Mission Critical Azure team. Our Mission Critical Azure team is a team where we develop infrastructure and we maintain this infrastructure, and we try to use as many great automation tools as possible in that team. I will be telling you a little bit about infrastructure as code tonight, the history, why it might work for you, and I have some great examples as well. I will do this together with my colleague Ronald, who will also give a short introduction of himself right now.
Yes, thanks, Jorrit. Well, good evening. My name is Ronald Buys. I'm almost working 2 years now at Wortell as a Azure Cloud Specialist. I'm also part of the Mission Critical Azure team, and I will be showing you something about Azure DevOps, how it is working, and I will also give you a demo about infrastructure as code with Azure DevOps together, and how you can use it to deploy your infrastructure as code to Azure. And that's my introduction. Next up, my colleague Maurice.
Yes, thank you. Hi guys, I'm Maurice de Jong, and as always, you can send in your questions during our Ask Wortell live stream. So you can send them here right on YouTube or on Twitter. And just like the last time, we have a raffle at the end of the show. You can win Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 for Xbox or PC. So send those questions in and get the conversation going.
Yeah, well, Microsoft Flight Simulator, I have it at home. I can advise you, ask your questions and try to win it. It's very easy going after a hard day of work, fly a little bit over to the Netherlands. So do it, #AskWortell, and we give you the answers. But what we're going to talk about today are a couple of things. We start with infrastructure as code. What is it? What are the benefits out of infrastructure as code? We're going to give you some examples in Visual Studio. Afterwards that, Ronald is going to tell you what is Azure DevOps, what can you do with it in combination with infrastructure as code. He's going to show us a little bit how to deploy infrastructure by Azure DevOps. And of course, during the complete show, you can ask us questions using the #AskWortell. And also, if you're tuning in later, or maybe you're looking at this back, you can ask them also, #AskWortell at Twitter, and also our engineers will ask it to you. Well, as we said before, there are two specialists today who are going to tell you a lot about this subject we're having. And I will ask Jorrit to start the show and share your knowledge about infrastructure as code.
Thank you, Laurens. Okay, so my job here tonight is to teach you a little bit about infrastructure as code and how it came to be. As Laurens already mentioned, we will be dividing this session in basically 2 parts. One is more a general part where I will describe the infrastructure as code, and then Ronald will do some hands-on deployments and will show you actually how it works. But first, let's start with a brief history of infrastructure as code, because it came from somewhere. It started somewhere, and I always like to think that people usually say things are better in the past. Well, in the case of maintaining infrastructure, that's really not the case, because if you think back, like maybe 30 years, 25, 20 years. If you were an engineer at that time, it would actually take quite a bit of money, quite a bit of time, and also a lot of errors, to order your hardware, to actually wait for it till it gets delivered to you. Then you had to install it. Then you had maybe to connect it in a rack, and then you had to put all the software on it. And there was a lot of room for mistakes in any of these steps. So yeah, it would take weeks to scale out. If you need new virtual machines, it would take a long time because of the order process, and it was also very costly. So I don't think that's that's not something where we want to go back to. Just a bit later, we had some virtualization enter. Yes,
I
sorry.
have a question. I think you have a presentation at this moment, and we're looking at you. So we're not seeing the presentation. Is it possible you're not sharing it on your screen?
Okay, just a second.
Well, that's a good thing of a live session. You prepare everything, but when you're starting, there's always something that makes it show that we're live at this moment.
Okay. Well, I think I restarted it, so it should be on the stream right now.
Yeah, totally true. We see your screen. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. So I already mentioned this part. It was slow, expensive, prone to errors in the past. So when virtualization actually came to life, that helped a lot. I mean, you had some virtual machines which you could spin up really easy, destroy really easy, but still it was quite cumbersome to install these machines, put software on them. Sure, you could script a lot, but still, if you needed to change something there, it was still a lot of work. And another real hazard of this was configuration drifts, because if you have like a very big portfolio of servers and you're installing software on it, and maybe you're messing up between the different environments, between development and production, or between multiple production servers, you miss something in a handbook somewhere. That might mean that your configuration is actually drifting. And that is really unpredictable in terms of how will this installation then run. So virtualization, it was great. It helped, but it was not really the end game, so to say. Together with virtualization, there were also some great infrastructure automation tools coming to life. People might know these names: CF Engine, Puppet, Chef. They're quite famous. They handle orchestration and installation of your servers, of software on your servers actually also. But when the cloud providers really start coming up, which is already like 15 years ago almost, they really enabled. There were drivers behind infrastructure as code, because they also offered an engine where you could hand over your templates to, and then it would be deployed into the cloud. So at that point, really, infrastructure as code came to life. There is a difference between infrastructure as code and infrastructure automation, because infrastructure automation is more about scripting and repeatable actions. So you have maybe like 100 web servers or something, and you want to install some package on it, and you could script that, and you can run it on all those machines at the same time remotely. But if something needs to change afterwards, then you would have to redeploy all these machines or redeploy all these scripts on these machines. And with infrastructure as code, you're actually creating a declarative model where you will just say, okay, this is my end infrastructure that I want, that I need. You can test it, you can work with multiple people on it, and then once it's all good, then you can just deploy it, into the cloud again, on top of whatever you have, and it will just fix these differences for you. So that's really a big change, and for the better. The definition of infrastructure as code, as we see it, or as you might find it on the web, is actually that you should be treating your infrastructure the same as you would source code from let's say an application or a development team who would typically develop an application or a website or whatever. They were used to putting this stuff in repositories, and now you can do the same with your infrastructure templates. So this is really nice definition of infrastructure as code. there's a lot of benefits, and you can see some of them on the screen right now. I think I mentioned most of them already. But in terms of speed, spinning up new environments based on environments that you already had, maybe some alterations to the templates, but then you will have a brand new environment. You can throw them away, you can redeploy them. It's lowering your costs, it's upping your efficiency. You can scale out to multiple machines easy. So yeah, there's a lot of benefits to infrastructure as code for both the engineer and also for the people paying for these machines. In terms of best practices, we have learned the hard way maybe at some point that there are some best practices around infrastructure as code. One of them is actually try to not create too much documentation, because your repository where all your templates and your parameter files are in, as long as they are aligned with whatever you have deployed in the cloud at that time, that's actually your documentation, right? You can find in the repository exactly what's running in the cloud. So yeah, you don't really need to create a lot of documentation on top of that. Like already mentioned, you should treat those templates, those configuration files, as you would development source code. One important thing is, you will always update the source, right? You will always work from whatever editor inside the repository, inside maybe Git a repository in a branch. You will update your configuration there, you will test it, and then you will deploy it onto the cloud. You will never, in a proper infrastructure as code setup, you will never be on the portal or be on some PowerShell or whatever to update your resources. With that comes the version control. You now have full version control of your files. You can see who changed what at what time, maybe why does something not work. You can find it all there. And another tip is to create smaller templates for maybe one resource or a few resources, and then tie these templates together, maybe through the use of a nested template, where you can just create one deployment and then a few sub-deployments. And you can create nice templates that way that are also interchangeable, maybe between other environmental deployments. So, for me, my tools that I usually work with, and I know that most of my team members also use the same tools for Azure. Visual Studio Code as an editor, you can edit both JSON and YAML with Visual Studio Code, works really well. And then there's the Azure DevOps platform, where Ronald will tell more about in a bit. And we mainly use the repositories, the pipelines, and the artifacts from that platform. Then there's the templates formats. For now, we are actually to work with ARM templates, which is JSON. And also we have our pipelines written in YAML, which is now also in our repository. So everything is in repository. So if we need to scale out, or maybe create another client, or create another project for a client, then we can just reuse a lot of that stuff and deploy these environments for them really quickly. I made a few screenshots, a few short examples of what an ARM template looks like. This one is very simple. Well, this one is an empty one, but it always consists with 4 blocks. You have your parameter section, you have your variable section, resources, and outputs, and I will show you some of these examples in the next slide. So in the parameter section, you will find your unique settings for this deployment. So a name of a virtual network in this case, the address space of the network, the subnets that are part of this virtual network, diagnostics account. So this is really where you make your deployment unique, right? And the variables, these are actually values that you can reuse in your template, in your deployment, and they can also consist of concatenated parameters if you want to. Then there's the resources block. This is where you actually are defining the resources that you want to be created by the ARM engine. So in this case, I'm creating a virtual network, right? And I will put it in a resource group, and I will give it these parameters. So it has a name and it has an address space. It has some subnets tied to it, and then it's connected to a log analytics workspace account to store the log data from this virtual network into. Final block is an output. This is the part you can use to write useful information, or maybe you've created some resources and you want to print them on the screen, or some resource IDs. Then you can use the output block for those types of values. If you look at it in a graphical sense, then this is a simple way to look at it. Typically you have the deploy file. That's the file that I just showed you. You can put your parameters inside the deploy file, or you can choose to actually detach these parameters into a separate parameter file, and then as soon as you start deploying, you will deploy a deploy file together with the parameters. That makes it really transparent also, because you can just see the parameter file, see what all the settings are, and you can reuse this for different environments. And then on top of that, you can actually enable some maybe custom script extensions, like I want to run a PowerShell as soon as this is done, or I have some desired state configuration I want to run on a virtual machine. You can tie that into your deployment as well. These files combined, you will hand them over to the ARM engine, and the ARM engine will actually convert this into a REST API call, and then feed it to Azure and create the resources for you. One important thing, it's not just ARM, right? Infrastructure as code can also be a set of PowerShell commands, or CLI scripts, or Terraform, as long as it's somewhere in a repository, right? As long as you have version control, then it counts as infrastructure as code, because if that's your truth, then it's just fine. And well, that was my general story about infrastructure as code, and I hope it was a little bit of a warm-up for Ronald, because he's going to actually show what it looks like and how it works. But maybe there's already some questions in the chat.
Well, Maurice, are there any questions at the moment?
Yes, there are a couple of questions around what if you have a greenfield scenario, or the question from Dennis Rietveld: what is the best approach to transition from a traditional deployment and config model to infrastructure as a code?
Okay, yeah, well, I can't really ask back, right? But you want to start greenfield, was that the word? So he wants to start anew?
Yeah, how about if you don't have a greenfield scenario? So you already have some infrastructure on Azure, and you want to start with infrastructure as a code. How to do that?
Okay, well, I mean that will require some tinkering with your editor, right? But there is this function where you can actually export your running resources, so the resources that you already have in Azure. You can export it as a template, so typically every resource will have the ability. I can show this maybe for one of my own resources. Let's say, let's see, resource groups. Oh, I have nothing in this one. Sorry about that. But yeah, there is this option where you can just click on your resource. Let's say I'm taking this network security group, and I want to export this. So this is my starting point to work with ARM. I can actually click on the button export template here, and it will generate this. Sorry?
You don't see your screen at this moment.
Oh, you don't see it? That's weird. Now you should see it again.
Yes, there it is.
Excellent. Sorry about that. So, like I was saying, if you are in your portal and you already have Azure resources, you can just find the resource that you're interested in, you can go to the export template, and then it will just generate this template for you, right? And then you can download it, or you can add it to your library for redeployment later. But if you download it, it will actually download the file for you. Typically, that would require some additional work because you probably want to remove some parameters or reset some parameters in this file. But this is a great way to start when you already have resources.
Okay, I think there lies another question, isn't it, Maurice?
Yes, there's another question from Lars from Blitterswijk. And he asks, should I also have my Azure policies as an infrastructure as a code?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you can make that a part of a blueprint, for instance, right, where you set up everything from subscription level to policies to infrastructure. To be honest, I don't do it at this moment. So we typically set these policies in a different way, using PowerShell or some other method. But yeah, we definitely are looking into using ARM as well for policies. Yeah.
Okay, nice. There's another question from Freek Beersen. Mm-hmm. And he asks, what are your thoughts about Project Bicep?
Okay, Project Biceps, yeah. Well, Project Biceps, I feel the same as Terraform, really. Our domain at the moment is Azure, right? And well, that's what our team does. So I'm not so much interested in multi-cloud. So Terraform, for me, it's not really a viable tool. Then you have Project Biceps, where they are actually creating a new language that will, it's supposed to be, I believe, a simpler language than ARM, or than JSON files, which is not that hard to understand. So I'm a bit skeptical about Project Biceps at the moment, to be honest. So for me, I don't see it work at this moment because you already have everything in ARM. It works really well. It's the closest you can get to Azure. So yeah, it works for us at the moment, but we are following Project Biceps as well.
All right. If we have enough time, I have another question from Mike Krom, and he's commenting. He likes the explanation, and he wonders if you could easily revert a template deployment.
Revert it to a previous version, then. Yeah. Well,
like undo it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, as long as it has to do with your infrastructure, I mean, it's declarative, right? So whatever you have in your template is what will be deployed. So if a previous version then of your template is the one that you want to deploy, then as soon as you have it set up properly, and I mean that's Ronald's presentation in a bit, so I don't want to go on about that too much. But if you have your pipelines working for you, then you can easily go back to one of your earlier versions of this template or parameter file, right? And we have also a bit of a different solution currently in our team. I don't think that Ronald will talk about it a lot, but there's also an option to use artifacts, Azure DevOps artifacts, feeds for this purpose. So yeah, it is possible.
All right, cool. Well, that's it for the questions at the moment.
Yeah,
So,
all right.
Okay, Jorrit, when I heard you say the policies, we did it by PowerShell, but is PowerShell, isn't that also infrastructure as code?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I said. And in this case, it might be quite simple, like single commands, right? Where you just put a policy on a subscription or on a resource group somewhere. But yeah, I mean, if you make this part of your deployment pipeline, it counts as infrastructure as code. But that should be your main way of deploying, right? You should not be in the portal adjusting the policies then by hand, because then you will definitely miss those updates.
Okay, great. Well, when I hear this, it looks like you're becoming more of a developer than an infrastructure man. Because when I'm coming out of the infrastructure world, and a couple of years ago I was walking around in the data centers and with my screwdriver and sometimes a hammer. But this is much more like just working like a dever, isn't it?
Yeah. So pretty much. So we are actually Mission Critical Azure. We are a team that's DevOps based. We have the DevOps principle. We maintain these infrastructures for our clients. So in the end, if they have a problem, sure, we are there to troubleshoot. But if we need to fix the problem, if it's something in the infrastructure, then we need to turn to our editors, maybe Visual Studio Code, and we have to dive deep into those ARM templates or in maybe some PowerShell commands to fix it. Because that's the place where you fix your stuff. You fix it in the repository, and you don't fix it on the portal anymore. And if you compare it to, back in the days, I used to be in data centers as well, installing firewalls and connecting all the cables and all that. Well, that's all virtual now, right? In the cloud, you don't see that anymore. I mean, it's just a service. It's just a provider, a resource provider from Azure that you connect to, and you tell it that you want something, and it will deploy it for you. And in the backend, as you can see in this export template as well, it's all code, right? It's all just JSON code. So yeah, you definitely need to have a basic understanding of what the backend of this cloud environment looks like. So you could say that you're working based on development principles, and you're also a lot in text editor. So yeah, that classifies as a developer as well. Yeah, sure.
Cool. And what are the benefits for me as an engineer of using code instead of the old way?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, in the general benefits, you will probably make a lot less mistakes, because you are building templates. You can validate these templates, if they're good. You can test them. You have different sort of test tools that will test your deployment. You can actually do a what-if deployment, right? You can say, okay, what would happen if I deploy this template in this resource group in Azure? And it will just tell you exactly what will change, right? If I will deploy these resources and this and that will change. Is that what you expect, right? And then you can say, okay, this is exactly what I expect. And then you can do the real deployment and deploy it into your cloud environment. So it will save you in the end. Sure, it will cost you a lot of time maybe to create these templates. But once you have them built and you can reuse them, then it will start to pay off, because it will save you a lot of time, and it will save you a lot of painful mistakes in the end.
Okay, well, when I think about development, I always think at Azure DevOps, because that's a tool where developers create their source code and deploy to production environments. So, well, if we're changing now also to code, and I think DevOps is also going to be the tool for infrastructure. And I think Ronald is going to tell us a lot about how DevOps is doing that. And if you have questions about what Ronald is telling you, use the hashtag #AskWortell. And I say, Ronald, take us.
Yes, thank you. Well, sure, Azure DevOps is, my tool to work with. So, Mission Critical Azure team is also using Azure DevOps mainly. So, yeah, that's the way to go from my perspective. And I think, you agree with me as well. So, let's take a look. Azure DevOps, and we're going to talk about what it can do, what we're doing with it, and I'm going to show you a demo at the end. So Azure DevOps in general, well, let's talk about what it can do. Because it's a platform. The platform is supporting different method techniques, tools as well, and as you can see, it's supporting CI, continuous integration, CD, continuous delivery, and both are coming or working with Azure repos and Azure pipelines. And also Git, a location to store your infrastructure as code, which is part of the Azure repos. And of course, there's more to tell about Azure DevOps, not something we're going to do today. But as you can see at the bottom right corner of the screen, you can see Azure Boards. Well, we're not going to discuss Azure Boards, but to give you an idea of what it does, well, you can track work items, you can signal bugs, even start a whole new project, starting with an epic in Azure DevOps. And all of this together comes with choosing the right process for your DevOps project. And the process you're able to use is Agile or Scrum, for example, or perhaps you even got a custom process applicable for your own organization, which can be created in Azure DevOps as well. And also choosing the correct process will affect the use of the epics, the features, the user stories, bugs, and more, which you can all configure within the process in Azure DevOps. Well, Azure DevOps and Azure Pipelines will be discussed later on. We'll go deeper inside what those components of Azure DevOps can do. And we got Azure Test Plans as well, together with Azure Artifacts. And Azure Test Plans are used to test your code. And Azure Artifacts, well, Jorrit mentioned it before. We're not going to discuss it today, but you can use it to create your own feeds and use the content within those feeds to deploy your code for instance, your web application or even your infrastructure as code. So let's look at Azure DevOps repos, because I've mentioned before, CI is part of Azure DevOps repos, and which means continuous integration, where you can push, merge your infrastructure as code to a central location within Azure DevOps. And by doing that, you also get version control. And this is really powerful because version control allows you to create new versions as you push and merge your code to Azure DevOps repos. But also when you've created a typo or you've created something that doesn't work at the end, you can get back to the older version and, well, see what changes are made to ensure you can find the correct error and, well, fix it, redeploy, and push your code again to Azure DevOps repos. But you can also coordinate code changes with your team. This can be linked towards Azure Boards, because when you spot a bug, you can link the bug to a specific file, and, well, the bug tells you what's going on with the file or what's wrong with it. And in this case, you can then look into the bug, you can fix your code, push and merge it again, and the bug is resolved. And this also benefits for certain organizations who have product owners, and those product owners can monitor the bugs and track changes and see where their environment is going to and if everything is still working as it should be. And of course, well, Azure DevOps repos, it's Git eventually. People also know, for instance, a Team Foundation version control, which is the previous, or, well, it's still part of the DevOps family. It's also a tool which you can still use within your own server. And actually, it can do the same or almost the same as Git. But Git is part of Azure DevOps repos. So we just talked about CI, but let's talk about Azure Pipelines, because we can also use Azure Pipelines within Azure DevOps to automate our deployment. And through continuous delivery, we can create tasks for our deployment. So by using continuous delivery in Azure Pipelines, we automate our tasks. As soon as you push or merge your code, it will get deployed automatically due to the tasks we created within our pipeline. And from a multi-tenant perspective, also, or a managed service provider, we are using this to to get change management and incident management working properly. Jorrit mentioned before, we're always updating the source. Well, in this case, we're only updating the source because when there's a change or an incident, we want it to be deployed through Azure pipelines. So Azure DevOps pipelines, we've talked about CD right now, continuous delivery to automate the delivery of your infrastructure as code. You got two flavors in Azure DevOps pipelines, which are YAML or Classic. And I prefer to use YAML because YAML pipelines can also become part of your infrastructure as code. So you save these YAML pipelines to the same repository you're saving your infrastructure as code templates to. By doing this, you can work together with your team. You can also track down bugs or add new features as the same you would do with infrastructure as code templates to deploy resources in Azure. Also, staying in your development tool like Azure DevOps repos, it saves time, but you can also maintain best practices from your code saved in your central repository. Because when you're creating your source code, you can also discuss with your team, okay, what's the best practice we can use within this code. And by saving it to a central repository, you can also maintain this best practice and use it later on. Well, we also got the other flavor, Classic. I abuse it a bit, and by sometimes I'm using it to find out which part of YAML code I need. So Classic basically means I'm clicking my pipeline through Azure DevOps pipelines, and by adding tasks, and eventually I've got the pipeline I want to use, and then I can click on View YAML code, and that's the abuse. I'm abusing it. I copy this part of the code to the YAML pipeline. Sometimes because there's no documentation, or I just want to find out on a quick way how this part of the YAML pipeline is working. Eventually, I prefer the YAML pipeline. And through the Classic, and that makes it quite easier, there are many pre-configured library steps. So you get a whole bunch of steps pre-configured within Azure DevOps pipeline. So you don't have to search throughout the web which task I'm going to need or which step I'm going to need and how to configure it. So when you combine those together, Azure DevOps and infrastructure as code, where do we look at? Because can we even use it together with Azure infrastructure as code? Well, absolutely. Even better, it should be your preferred method. Use Azure DevOps and infrastructure as code together to maintain those best practices, to maintain those central stored templates and source code, just to have a better cooperation with your team and your colleagues, but also to maintain that high level of security. Well, we also look at continuous integration, continuous delivery. We've talked about Git as well. We're using Azure pipelines, of course. And also Azure boards. I've mentioned it before a couple of times, where you can link a bug, or you can create a new feature within Azure boards. And of course, it's very important to do this so that you can track your own progress and development from your team. So some advantages and best practices from Azure DevOps. The most important advantages are a central location for all the infrastructure as code template. And these can be YAML, PowerShell, JSON for ARM. This can be many stuff or many source code. Well, version history also an advantage. I've mentioned it at Azure DevOps repos. it can be useful in case a change didn't work the way you intended to. You can revert it and redeploy. And automating the deployment saves time and reduces the amount of error. By pushing and merging code, you can configure your Azure pipeline in a way that it automatically gets triggered, and then it will run and deploy your infrastructure as code to Azure. And some best practices, well, I find it hard to say best practices, but from my perspective, and most important, be specific about what you're building, because there are many options. You can do many things within a YAML pipeline, infrastructure as code. But from the pipeline perspective, you got, for example, a trigger, and you can put a wildcard on it. But that means every time you push or merge code into your central repository, this pipeline will get triggered. Well, this can result in a lot of conflicts. So be specific on what you want, where you want to trigger it on. For example, a single file. If the single file gets updated, well, then only then the Azure pipeline gets triggered. And be sure to test. You can build in several steps within Azure pipeline, but you can also test it on your own. Test it in a test environment, but stay active on testing, because when you've created something, well, you got to make sure that what you've created, it will eventually work as well. So this is DevOps in general, and some of the advantages, best practices, what it can do, and we've talked about the combination of infrastructure as code. And I think Lawrence have some questions as well before we get to the demo.
Yes, very sure. First, you said testing at the end. Is it? Can I use it in an OTAP scenario also, or something like that?
Yes, definitely. Well, I will tell more about it in the demo. But what you will do is create several connections from your Azure DevOps environment to Azure. And this can be several subscriptions, like a production subscription, an expectation subscription, or a test or development subscription. And within your Azure DevOps pipelines, you can define which subscription you're going to deploy to. And by using a well-named pipeline, you can also see and already read, okay, this pipeline is going to deploy a virtual machine to my test environment.
Okay, great. And then when I hear this, and I'm thinking back again on development, you also, I think, can have something like a product backlog and working like an agile way with infrastructure.
Yes, we actually do. Well, the mission critical Azure team, we got several sprints every 2 weeks, and each sprint we're selecting different items from the backlog which have priority or which are important to us to get developed immediately. Well, as soon as the sprint ends, you got some product developed eventually, and you're gonna demo it to your colleagues, and eventually customers will benefit from it as well. So yeah, Azure Boards is really important in our development process at all. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, I have some questions. I think Maurice, are there also questions from online?
Yes, the questions are coming in from the community, of course. Let's first start with Mike, with a question from Mike. He sent it in already last week. Let's get that one first. He was asking, what RBAC role do you give to a service connection?
Yes, well, I've seen it as well last week, so it's a great question. Well, most important, we're going to give it the contributor role, simply because it cannot change any permission within Azure from Azure DevOps, but it can deploy, it can remove, it can change a resource in Azure. So basically, it can do everything we want it to, but we don't want to create any security risk or something else. So that's why the contributor role is, the role to go.
Yeah, and to add to that, you can scope this obviously on a subscription level, or maybe even down to a resource individual level, right? So that's all up to you. You create the connection. So you create in Azure Active Directory a service principal, and then you connect your DevOps environment using the service principal into Azure. And that's where you actually start scoping these role-based access control. So you can say, okay, I'm only ever going to deploy something in relation to the network. So yeah, he might have access to the networking resource group, but not to the virtual machines or whatever. So it works exactly the same as any other RBAC in Azure. You need to scope it well.
Yeah.
Okay. Then there's a question from Lars again. The question is about using different repositories. He asks if you can use a GitHub repository in Azure DevOps.
Well, yes, you actually can. You can create a connection to GitHub, and so you can use the source code from GitHub in Azure DevOps. Yeah, that's possible. I can perhaps show you within the demo where you can find it, but yeah, that's definitely possible.
Okay, great. And then there's a question from last week's winner, and we want to ask him if he wants to get in touch with us so we can make sure he gets his prize, the Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. IJsblokje, can you please send a message by email to werken@wortell.nl? Then we can make sure you get your prize. And he has another question for you guys. He asks, can you use pipelines to change an active infrastructure as code deployment? For example, scale up or scale down resources, of course.
Well, yes, you can. Actually, the demo is going to show you how you can scale up and scale down. And well, the ARM engine, just to clarify this, it works incremental. So each time you push infrastructure as code through Azure pipelines to Azure, it will work on an incremental way, which means every time you push it or you're going to deploy it, it will work as an update. So yes, also resizing will work the same way.
Okay, cool. Then we have another question from Martijn van der Weijenberg. He asks if there's any downside or business continuity risk when using infrastructure as a code in environments that contain stateful resources, like for instance, the Azure SQL databases.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are certain types of resources that will definitely be at risk to blindly redeploy. Maybe like an Azure SQL database. You want to make sure that the data is still in there. So you might want to incorporate some step where you actually put that data somewhere and then re-import it as soon as you recreate the resource. But yeah, it is possible to do it with the state. But yeah, it will require some additional work.
Yeah, one addition to it, as soon as you've deployed for instance, an SQL server together with some databases, well, as soon as your ARM template doesn't, well, it's not the same as the resource deployed in Azure, you're going to update it. Well, indeed, then Jorrit has the correct answer. It's going to be removed or it's not there anymore. But as soon as it's the same, it will work incremental. And in that way, it will remain there. So there, in that case, there won't be a change.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, so you can safely scale up or scale out your Azure SQL database if you want to, and the data will remain in there. That's what you're trying to say. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it at the moment for the questions. I can imagine if people are watching the recording of the show, let me remind them, you can still send in your questions using #AskWortell on Twitter, or find us on LinkedIn and get in touch. It's no problem. We are here to share our knowledge with the community.
Yeah,
So
it's good to hear a lot of people asking questions. And I think Ronald has prepared a demo for us. So let's go to the demo and see what other questions are going to generate out of that. Ronald, can you show us what you created?
Yes, definitely. Okay, what we're looking at is an Azure DevOps environment created for this live event. Well, you can see at our screen that we're in a organization also created for this event. And well, this is the project you can see here, Infrastructure as Code live event. Well, mainly this is Azure DevOps. So what are we looking at? Well, this is the first screen you're entering as soon as you open Azure DevOps, and with the project in the URL. So you get basically a welcome screen, simply with a welcome message. You got some project stats to show up for, and as you can see already, we've got some pull requests going on, some commits from my own source code, and we've already run some pipelines, and there are 2 members active on this project. Okay, well, for Azure boards, we're going to skip that part because we're not going to discuss it today. Let's first talk about how this project is set up. Because, of course, we've got a service connection, and this is the most important one because the service connection is connected right now to my Azure environment. And through this service connection, I'm able to deploy on a subscription level resources to Azure. So my service principal is configured right now to be able to deploy resources from a subscription level in every resource group I've created. So let's see how this how repos are looking like. So this is Azure DevOps repos. Well, we've created a repository, Infrastructure as Code live event. We're currently in the master branch, and soon we will look into the integration branch. And a branch is actually so we've got the master branch, and the integration branch is something different than the master branch. It's actually a different folder. You can look at it at a certain way. So every change I've made into master will not appear in integration unless I will submit or I will push the code to integration as well. I can do that through Visual Studio Code, or I can do a pull request right here at the left side of the screen. So as you can see, we're looking at the master branch. We've got some folder structure going on here, which says source. Well, we've got some ARM templates. We can see here we've got some ARM templates for network components. We've got a virtual network with a subnet deployment JSON. Jorrit mentioned before the structure of an ARM template. Well, it starts with a deploy file, and we've also created, in this case, a parameter file. And well, we're going to deploy it just in a couple of minutes to show you what will happen as soon as we're deploying it. So infrastructure as code, as mentioned before, we're developing YAML pipelines as well. We're putting it in our central repository, as you can see here. This is our deploy pipeline for network security groups, and this is our deploy pipeline for virtual machines. And yeah, we've got some magic going on here. Well, as soon as we're starting the pipeline, you're going to see which magic we've created for this evening. So we'll get back at that in a couple of minutes as well. Soon we're starting the Azure pipeline. Okay, so we've got the pipelines for our last thing. Then we'll switch over to Visual Studio Code. Well, you will see a infrastructure as code deploy VM pipeline, which already deployed several times. As soon as you click it open, you will see the runs it has gone through. Also some some runs which were failing or didn't work, but mostly they did. And what's most important about one of these runs? Well, we'll click one and let's see what happens here. Well, we've got a deploy VM. This is a job which starts the deploy of our virtual machine. It will initialize the job, it will check out our code, and well, it will start the magic, which we'll see in a couple of minutes. It will start the deployment of the virtual machine, and it will end with our steps we've created, that the magic was successful, and well, the magic ends eventually. So what more are we using? Well, I didn't discuss variable groups so far. Well, I will now. We're using variable groups to define some of the information required to deploy through Azure pipelines to Azure. So most important one is the infrastructure as code shared variable group, which when I open it, you will see it contains the service connection name we've seen before, same name, the subscription ID we're going to deploy to, and this is the ID of the subscription. So let's switch over to Visual Studio Code. Then I will show you what happens. Because we're going to need this information. This information is needed because eventually we'll want to deploy it to Azure, but we're going to need a service connection name. So this variable, we're going to retrieve it from here. And how are we going to do that? Well, you got a variable group name right here. Infrastructure as code shared. It's at the top of our template. So this gives me access to the variable group infrastructure as code shared, and I'm going to retrieve a variable named service connection name, which is the same right here. So I'm going to do the same with subscription ID, and eventually we're seeing some other variables as well. Well, we've separated them. Infrastructure as code, network security group. And here you can see the resource group defined for this deployment. And we're going to use it to define our resource group. So in this way, we can deploy to the correct service connection, to the correct subscription, and to the correct resource group. So the only thing left for our pipeline is to define, okay, but where is our template? Well, actually, this means we're at the root of our central repository, which you can see on the left side. And we're going to drill down because we've got ARM. And when we open it, we got security. And eventually, we got the deploy file. So that's basically our YAML pipeline for the required step to deploy the network security group, which we'll do in a couple of minutes. Now, we're switched to a JSON template, and this is an ARM template. This one will tell Azure, the API eventually, what resource do I want to deploy and how is it configured? Well, we've got some parameters set up right here, but we've got a separate parameter file. I will show you in a minute. We've got some variables going on. Well, just the setting name for the diagnostics. No functions we're not going to need, so forget about that. And then we've got the resources. Well, this is the network security group. Okay, we're using the API version available from Azure. We've put in a name. We're retrieving the resource group location automatically, so you don't have to worry about that. Putting in West Europe, North Europe, or something else, it will retrieve the location from the resource group. And then we will put in the security rules. Okay, well, that's the most important part. Let's go to the parameter file. So we've got some parameters defined in the deploy file, and it will retrieve those parameters from the parameter file, like the name of the network security group. We will connect it to the right virtual network, to the correct subnet. We also want to know the subnet address prefix, where is our network resource group, so that it can find the virtual network. We've also putting up some diagnostics. We've got a log analytics workspace, a resource group monitoring, and this I will show you in the Azure portal also in a minute. And eventually we've got our security rules. This tells us inbound allow ICMP. We've defined our protocol. We're allowing everything to connect to it through ICMP, which means actually ping. We're setting us the priority. It's going to be inbound, and we're going to allow it. We're going to do the same for remote desktop. This is an external IP for whitelisting, and we've added some default deny all, which means actually we don't want any traffic going through the network security group. Okay, so basically this is an ARM template for a network security group, which consists of a deploy file and a parameter file. So let's switch back. And let's look at our pipeline, because we've deployed a virtual machine right here. Well, first of all, let's go to the Azure portal instead, because otherwise I'm going too fast. We're looking at the Azure portal. These are resources already created for this demo. So we're looking at a resource group containing a key vault, a management resource group, which our virtual machine resides in. We've got our monitoring resource group, which will hold our log analytics workspace, our network, which will hold our virtual network with its subnet, and our network security group. And let's start with our virtual machine, because this one is deployed through our ARM template. So nothing was configured previously, so it's fully deployed through our infrastructure as code. Well, let's open it. As you can see, size, it's got a public IP, and let's change that. Let's change the size and the public IP. So what we're gonna do, I'm gonna close all of this. We're gonna get the parameter file. What we're gonna do, we've created some logic into this ARM template, which I will show you in a couple of minutes. Let's put it to false, because I don't want a public IP anymore. Let's scale it down. I want another size. Okay, what I've done, I've saved my code, and now I'm going to push it to master directly. Put a description on it. We're going to stage it. We're going to commit it. And let's sync it. Okay, what happens right now? Let's see. It starts already deploying. Why? Why does it start already deploying? Because we've configured the trigger. And this trigger will only, and this is the part of my presentation where I mentioned be specific. So only this parameter file, if it's changed, will trigger this deploy virtual machine pipeline. And it also looks at the branch master and only master. So whenever we're doing something in integration, it won't get triggered at all. So this will run. Let's see. There it goes. Magic already starting. So let's wait and see if there's any questions so far, because this will take about 3 to 4 minutes. And well, the magic already starts. As you can see in the background, my lights going purple right now. And we'll see what happens next. So Lars, are there any questions?
Yes, it's great to see it's going, it's changing, so that's a good thing. We're starting. Curious what the message is going to be. For first a question on my side, you're working with pipelines and you're deploying them now. Are there approval ways also to build in those pipelines?
Can you repeat that one more time? I didn't quite get it.
And you deploy this and you say testing, 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 where it's for me also possible to build in like a guard for approval for architects or other roles before it's going to be deployed to another environment?
Yes, definitely. That's called a release, and within a release, you can build several steps, including checking in code, so pushing merging code to your central repository, creating a approval, and even you can do several things because the approval can be configured in a way that nothing happens as soon as the approval doesn't get approved. But you can also build in a bypass. So whenever someone needs to approve this approval, but it takes too long because you want some continuous deployments as well, and don't wait too long on a product owner, for example, or another developer approving this approval flow, then you can also bypass it. But it's possible by building in a approval within a release. Yes.
And then I also know there are possibilities of building some kind of checks in those pipelines. It's also possible to check if the infrastructure code is good or there is any security issues in it or something like that.
Yes, that's also possible. Well, as soon as this pipeline is done, we've built in some checks, which I will show you in a couple of minutes. We can do something like if the resource group exists or does a network security rule matches our best practices, etc. These are all options and possibilities to realize this. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. And maybe Maurice, are there also questions already from our live audience?
Yes, there's another question from Lars. He asks, should I store my infrastructure as a code with the code of my application?
Yeah, so you combine these two and store it within the same folder, I guess.
Yeah, well, for instance, if you are writing a web application and probably you will be running it on Azure, and you will be deploying some Azure resources as infrastructure, as a code. Do you combine the ARM templates with your with the code of your application in one? I'm guessing he means it's in one repository. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you can put it in a single repository, but I will separate it on a folder level, perhaps even branch. You can choose, for instance, for a branching strategy, which maintains a branch for specific only ARM templates and another one for your web application. But I would go the way for instance, we just showed you the master branch and the integration branch, and I would separate it on a folder level. You could see also my folder structure, which I had a root folder source. And beneath it, I had a folder for ARM, I had a folder for pipelines, and I had a folder for PowerShell. All separated to at least show colleagues, but also other developers, that code or source code is within a different folder. Also ARM, which is meaning, Azure Resource Manager, it's infrastructure as code. So you're deploying your infrastructure as code to Azure. And your web application, for instance, ASP.NET got a different folder structure, different files, and I would put it in a separate folder. You can combine those within an Azure pipeline, so you can deploy your infrastructure first and your web application after.
Okay, cool. Yeah, just like you said, be specific.
Yeah, I'd like to add that you can also choose for a multi-repo obviously, where you store your infrastructure in one repo and the development code into another. It depends also a little bit. I mean, if the developers are also tasked with the infrastructure, which they might, if it's like platform as a service, maybe infrastructure easy to manage, then definitely you can store them in the same repository. But yeah, there's also this option, to just create multiple repositories and reference to those different repositories from your pipeline. So yeah, there's multiple ways to do this.
Okay, great. Thank you for that addition. There's another question from Dennis Rietveld. He asks, setting all this infrastructure as a code, setting it up seems like a lot of work, and of course, initially time-consuming. What's the turning point for this, for moving to infrastructure as a code with DevOps?
No, well, we've started. Yeah, that's going to be difficult because we've started for almost several years now to build a library with ARM templates, and it takes time, but eventually it's going to pay off. But there's a lot of templates on GitHub as well, and we're using GitHub too to start somewhere and adjust these templates to that it could work for our situation or our deployment. So yeah, it takes time, but if you're going to look at I'm going to deploy a single resource each week, invest some time in Azure DevOps, and eventually deploying your resource each week at the same time and doing the same amount of tasks, it will eventually save time and you've got some time left to spend on other things, like developing your pipeline to an even more better pipeline, or upgrading your infrastructure as code. Because you've got to invest somewhere somehow time first, to get there and to use Azure DevOps as it should be used.
Yeah, it's hard to put a number on it. That's true. Yes, it takes a lot of time. But in the end, once you have it, once you, start small, maybe with, something you do repeatable, like Ronald said, let's say maybe network security group, something important. Once you have these templated and maybe pipeline built for it, then you can just start redeploying these NSGs over and over again, right? So it will also save you a potential security issue where maybe somebody during the day added something to a certain network security group, which maybe was not the best idea to, maybe enable SSH or RDP, publicly to the internet. There's then possibilities to have these templates be deployed on top of it as soon as it detects that there's something off, right? You can compare with a what if deployment, what I said before, you can compare the running config to your repository and then fix any potential mistakes by using these pipelines and be specific with your trigger. It will all go automatically for you, right? So that will help a lot. So start small, and you will see the benefits quite soon, I think.
I agree. Yes.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Well, that's it for the questions at the moment.
I've mentioned 3 to 4 minutes. It's still deploying, but you will always see in a live event that it will take longer than expected. So perhaps we can move on to our demo and look at our network security group, or do you want to go somewhere else, Laurens, first?
No. I just had a question because we were talking about Git. Also, we're deploying, of course, a lot of solutions. Do you think it's possible for us to show and to share some of our experience on GitHub for our community?
Yeah, we haven't done that actually until now. we're going to, and perhaps even sooner than we're thinking of right now. Yeah, we've built a library, and some of these templates, I still cannot find even on the internet, or someone already has it but hasn't come to GitHub with the template. So yeah, I think we're gonna do that in a really small amount of time. So, and that's definitely something we want to share on GitHub as well. Our experience, our own developed templates, and putting parts of code to help other people with their own templates. So yeah, we're gonna do that.
Great. It's always good not only to share information and knowledge by this, but also really knowledge on things like GitHub, because that's a great platform for. What take us ahead in your demo?
So as you can see, already 11 minutes and still going. Well, it actually works already. I have no idea why this step is taking so long, because as you can see, we've already downscaled as we've put in our template. The public IP, as you can see also right there, it's not there anymore. Well, it's starting. It's definitely having a rough time starting. So I think that's the reason why this step still doesn't complete yet. It can take some time. Normally it would take lesser time than as expected, but yeah, sometimes it's bad luck in a step or task can take a bit longer than expected. But we're gonna look at something different right now. We've got our network security group. Well, this one is somewhat special, because I'm going to show you a pipeline right now which has no runs yet. Well, it's already defined, it's ready to go. And what makes it so special? Well, this network security group is created by hand through the portal. Bad me, I shouldn't do that, but it's already there. So according to one of the questions we've received, so you've got a resource already in Azure. Yes, we can export it. And yeah, it's gonna look empty because it's a default network security groups. And this network security group has default rules, so it won't do much more than it already should be. What we're gonna do, as soon as this deploy virtual machine is ready, we're gonna show you when deploying to a already existing network security group with the same name, because I already showed you the template, that the resource will stay there. And the rules are getting updated. Well, it's not connected to a subnet as well, and it will be. So to show you of how a existing resource will be able to get updated by infrastructure as code, and that you can reverse engineer it eventually. So since this one is still running, we're going back to our resource groups, and we're going to look at the key vault, because we've put a key vault in there as well. Disk encryption, because it went green, correct?
I couldn't hear you for a second there, Ronald, but your lights went green now.
Yeah, okay, so that means our pipeline is ready. Yes, it is. Perfect. So, that's the magic I was talking about. What happened?
We can't see your screen at the moment, Ronald.
Still?
Yeah, you have to reshare it.
Let's see.
But we trust you. We trust that everything is green right now, because your whole room is
Wortell green room.
Yeah.
The moment it went green, it looked like you had an itch on the network. So.
Okay, let's see. Indeed, my screen share went down. Okay, I've started to reshare it. Yes,
Yeah.
there we go. Okay, so what happened? Well, start the magic. It's simply a PowerShell script shooting a webhook to if this then that platform online, and it's connected to my Philips Hue bridge. That's why when we've started the magic, it went purple. We've deployed the virtual machine, and the magic was successful. Well, just to show you why it was successful, we've put a condition on it. So as soon as the previous steps are successful, you may only tell that the magic also was successful. So it did, because it got changed, it got deployed, and eventually it will stop the magic. It will go back to my green scene in Philips Hue. Just to also show you what we can do with webhooks. That's also interesting, not just for your own home automation and giving some light show, but you can also do some really cool stuff with webhooks. Okay, well, let's first get back to our virtual machine. Then we'll talk about the key vault as well, since I've already started talking about it. Well, we've seen it got resized and no public IP is there anymore, and it's running. So that went pretty well. Besides the time it took to redeploy, or to update, but okay. Okay, let's go to the key vault, because I've mentioned we've got a key vault with a disk encrypt naming convention, and when we'll go into the key vault, you can see I've got no access. Well, that's correct, since I don't have any access so far. So let's give me some access to see what happened. Okay, well, that's done.
Look,
Look.
you have done that much time before.
Yes, I have. Okay, we're looking at disk encryption keys, because our virtual machine got deployed initially, but it also will encrypt our disk automatically, and it will store it in a key vault. So whenever you're retrieving any data from a disk which is encrypted, you're going to find your disk encryption key within the key vault. And this also comes from the ARM template, because we're defining the name of the key vault, and then we're also defining the resource group it resides in. Okay, enough about that. We're going to the network security group, because this one got deployed by someone who doesn't like infrastructure as code. So we're going to reverse that. We're going to reverse this by deploying it. Well, it got no runs. We haven't changed any code. It could get automatically triggered, but we're just going to run it. Okay, and of course, same thing here. We've got some magic, so you can look at the background and seeing lights going wild, and well, you will see this in a bit. It will also take some time, I guess. So let's see where it's acquiring an agent. Perhaps something to mention. As soon as you're running a pipeline, you've got a agent already available within your DevOps project. But as soon as you're running multiple pipelines, each pipeline needs to wait on the other before it can run, because the agent is busy at the moment. Okay, and there we're going. There's the light. It already goes purple again. And as I've mentioned about the agent, you can buy multiple agents, so you can run multiple Azure pipelines, which something we've done because, running pipelines is great, but as soon you're, there goes the flickering lights.
Cool.
And we're going back to green again. Yes, there we go. Okay, let's see. Okay, same name. Let's see our deployments. Here you can find in the side menu, you can see on your resource group which deployment just took place. It got last modified with the time and date stamp, how long it took for the deployment to take place. Okay, let's open our network security group. Great. So, same name, different rules, and as mentioned in the ARM template, these were the rules to be added, and it's connected to the correct subnet. So our subnet is secured right now, and our management VM is well, it doesn't have any public IP right now, but when it has a public IP, it can be reached from this IP over a remote desktop protocol. So you can open up a connection to this virtual machine. So these are the two pipelines, and well, the two things I wanted to show you are about our infrastructure as code scenarios. So we've done scaling down a virtual machine, removing its public IP, and we've well, reverse engineered a network security group and deployed it to Azure. And as you could see, it got the right security rules and, well, still the same name. So yeah, that works pretty well. And that's it for the demo.
Great. Thank you very much, Ronald. I think next time we're going to do this at the office, and then you see all the office going from green to purple. That would be very
great. That would be great.
I think there are some questions. Maurice, am I right?
Yeah. There's one question, at least until now. Will infrastructure as a code updates also be logged in Azure Activity? How do they reflect in the Azure Activity logs?
Yeah, well, perhaps we can show that to you. Okay, I'm gonna open up. Well, you can see, is this correct? Yeah, well, this is gonna show you, well, what did I do? I get to the activity log. I should go back. Well, time span last 6 hours. If you've deployed yesterday, just adjust this to get the correct activity log. Well, you can open it, and as soon as you're going to the JSON tab, you scroll down. Well, it's a bit messy because this is the request body translated from my ARM template, and it will show you the same changes I've made in the ARM template, but then within the Azure portal through activity log. So yes, this is a perfect example how you can retrieve this kind of information through activity log.
Okay, nice, cool. Okay, there's another question from Martijn van der Weijenberg. What's the difference between the shown infrastructure as a code approach and Azure Blueprints?
Yeah. Okay. Should I take it, or do you
Yeah,
want to?
yeah. If you want to take it, please.
Okay. Well, the shown infrastructure as code is what Ronald showed in his demo was more like a single resource, right? It was to demonstrate in an easy way what an infrastructure as code template can do for you using pipelines. If you want to use blueprints, it actually extends to more than just your infrastructure, right? It will also embody governance, like asked before, can you do policies? Well, you can make them part of your blueprint. It can actually create a subscription for you exactly the way you want it, right? So on a subscription level, it will create everything down till maybe the resource that you want to define. So let's say you have some environment you set up for a customer. Let's say you are maybe a software vendor or whatever, and you're creating the same environment over and over again for a different label. Then that might be the right time to actually start using blueprints, setting up everything from your subscriptions to your role-based access to your policies to your governance down to your infrastructure. It's much more complex. So they are they have their own usage. Let's put it that way.
All right. Well, there are some comments. Freek Bersen says, "Well, that's a cool demo, Ronald." And Mike Rom is suggesting to upgrade your demo. If you give your service connection more rights, like owner rights, then you can set the access rights on your key vault via infrastructure as a code. Yes, of course.
Yes, that's correct. Great one.
Yeah. Well, that's it from the community. So, all right.
Well, great. Well, then I think this is it for the show for today. First, I like to give my congratulations to Mike Rom. He's the winner of today with the best question. Mike, if you send an email to werken@wortell.nl, we can contact you about the prize you have won. The flight simulator from out of Wortell. Otherwise, what did we do today? We talked about infrastructure as code. Jorrit showed you actually what it is, how you can use it in Visual Studio. And then Ronald went further on that, showing how you can deploy it on by using of Azure DevOps and pipelines, actually. Maybe there are more questions about it. Just ask them. Do the hashtag AskWortell on Twitter, and also we give you answers about it. The next show is going to be the 11th of 11th November. You can look at it also. I'd like to thank Friso Visser and Jeroen Niese for the engineering and the hosting actually of this event. We're going to do it more often. If you want to look at it, maybe you have ideas. Do you want to talk about this? So I'm very curious about it. Let us know, and we're going to look at it. And also maybe if you are interested in working for Wortell, you can also mail at work@Wortell. We have vacancies on the site. I'd like to thank Jorrit and Ronald for being present today, for sharing the knowledge, and I hope we're going to do it more often. And Maurice, for looking all the social channels and seeing what's happening over there. And then I would like to thank you all for watching and like and subscribe. And see you next time. Thanks.
All right.
Yes, thanks.